And I just want to say one other thing about Du Bois as an urban theorist. I mean, it's pretty striking the contrast between the title of the two books on the left and the right of the screen. The one on the left, of course, is Park and Burgess, The City. And the one on the right, we haven't talked about in this class, but we may talk about later on, by my former teachers at UCLA, Alan Scott and Edward Soja. So the Chicago school, their book was titled The City. As everyone knows, they were theorizing the city via a deep analysis of Chicago. To some degree, my professors, my former professors in the LA school, Professors Soja and Scott, they were analyzing LA very clearly, but they also represented their work as kind of LA is the basis, they believed, for understanding the condition of the city in the late 20th century. But it's very interesting, that move. In other words, they're clearly building their theory from a place, but their main title is The City. So the example is contextually embedded, but it's presented as generalizable knowledge. And Du Bois, if we juxtapose Du Bois's book title to those, it's a striking contrast, because on the face of it, the title really does look like an empirically descriptive account of the Philadelphia Negro, a social study. But the argument that I've been trying to develop here, building on the work of Loughran and others, is that it's actually very much a broader argument about the color line and the way that processes of racialization structure urban space and urbanization processes more generally. But remarkably, very suggestively, Du Bois's title is not the general conclusion that he derives. In other words, the racialized formations of urbanization in the modern United States, or racial exclusion in the production of urban space, or something like that, or the condition of the race and the condition of the Black working class in Philadelphia. It's really just kind of an analysis of the site, and then the conclusions, the broader conclusions we have to derive from that. So it's a very interesting, I think a lot more can be said about this, but I just want you to reflect on the way that the authors present their knowledge and try to derive broader implications of their knowledge. Du Bois puts forward in his title the site, the location, and the focal point. And from this, I'm arguing, he then derives some much broader arguments. In the case of Chicago school and LA school, they declare rather, one could say like aggressively, or at least confidently, that their site is the city, understood as kind of a generalized focal point for theory. And then the site, the place, is kind of in the subtitle at best. In Park and Burgess, Chicago doesn't even occur in the subtitle. It's just the city. And the Chicago is understood as sort of a reference point in relation to which to understand the city in general. In the case of the LA school, they still embrace, of course, in dialogue with the Chicago school, the city, but they're explicit about their LA focal point. Okay, so this is Loughran's summary conclusion of this whole puzzle about Du Bois, not only as an empirical sociologist, but as an urban theorist. He says, prior to the swell of renewed interest in Du Bois' sociology, the Philadelphia Negro was cast often, along with the other major sociological work of Du Bois's early career, The Souls of Black Folk, into the social realist literature, with works such as Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives and Jane Addams' edited volume on Hull House. The bracketing of Du Bois's scholarship as realist literature rather than social science has downplayed the theoretical significance of the Philadelphia Negro and Du Bois's oeuvre more broadly. And then he says, Du Bois provided, this is still Loughran, the most comprehensive analysis of the role of race and racial inequality in modern cities among early sociologists. Du Bois's understanding of how the socially constructed racial hierarchy of the United States was shaping the material conditions of industrial cities prefigured a lot of subsequent work. So kind of thinking that I'm going to just stop and open it up for discussion. I have some more points to make about institutionalized racism. Maybe I'll just conclude with this slide, and then let's open it up and get into a conversation about this. So basically, the summary that Loughran derives from, or the analysis that Loughran derives from his reading of Du Bois, which I think is very powerful, runs as follows: that basically urbanization in the United States during the preceding 2 centuries was fundamentally shaped by racial capitalism, as already discussed here. The industrial city of Philadelphia was produced through the mass migration of Blacks from the US South and subsequent forms of racial enclosure and oppression within specific zones of the city in the 7th Ward. So it's an interesting counterpoint to Engels, because here we see that the socio-spatial divisions of the city are mediated through not just class, but racial exclusion. And we can talk about the degree to which that might have also applied even in Engels' account of 19th century Manchester. I briefly alluded last time to the question of the Irish and their particular positionality here. And it's also clearly, and maybe we can talk about this in our discussion today, a strong counterpoint to the Chicago School before the Chicago School had even been founded, in the sense that Du Bois rejects the idea of a general universal theory of secession and spatial exclusion. He thinks that the enclosure and the centralization, the kind of clustering together of the Black population of Philadelphia, is directly the result of racial exclusion and discrimination on the housing market and on the labor market, and in other sectors of society as well, education, health, and so forth. So that unless you have a much more historically specific account of the institutional arrangements that racialize people, in this case Black people, and mobilize racialization as a tool of marginalization and oppression, you can't understand the production of urban space. So I would argue it's a devastating critique of the social Darwinist universalizing theories of secession that were embraced by the Chicago School. It rejects not only the empirics, but the very theoretical framework, the very conceptual framework, suggesting that the differentiation of ethnic and racial populations could be understood in analogy to the differentiation of plant species in a habitat. For Du Bois, was basically throwing out the sociological puzzle entirely. The sociological puzzle for Du Bois was precisely to analyze the institutional logics of enclosure, exclusion, oppression, marginalization that contribute to the conditions of the Black working class and the Black population more generally within Philadelphia and within other cities. And even though Du Bois doesn't use Engels' concept of social murder, it would be pretty easy to deploy that concept in interpreting the account that Du Bois offers, especially of the 7th Ward, where we see devastating conditions which immiserate, impoverish, and ultimately destroy and kill significant sectors of the Black population.